At the family reunion, everything seemed normal until my granddaughter pulled me aside. Her eyes were filled with panic, and she whispered that I had to leave immediately. I was stunned and confused, but she insisted I go without explaining. I trusted her, so I quietly gathered my things and walked away. And when the truth about my son came to light, it hit harder than any betrayal I had ever imagined. Before we continue, please give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, watching steam rise from my coffee cup, trying to process what Mitchell had just said. For 3 decades, our family reunion had been sacred, held every year at Mitchell's house in Westchester the weekend before Thanksgiving. I'd never missed one, not when his mother was alive, not during her cancer treatments, not even the year I broke my hip. The silence stretched between us through the phone line, and I could hear him breathing, waiting for me to simply accept this dismissal. But something in his tone, that careful precision like he'd rehearsed the words, made my chest tighten with more than just hurt. The drive to Westchester took 2 hours through November cold. Mitchell hadn't explicitly forbidden me from coming, just said I wasn't expected, and that distinction gave me courage to show up. I parked down the street from his colonial house, noting unusual numbers of cars filling his driveway. Through the bay window, I could see warm, gathering light, shadows moving in patterns of reunion joy. Walking up the driveway felt like approaching a house where I'd once lived, but no longer belonged. The front door stood ajar, letting out laughter and the smell of Brenda's turkey stuffing. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The entire room fell silent. 40 faces turned toward me, expressions shifting from surprise to guilt. My brother-in-law Marcus dropped his wine glass, crystal shattering against hardwood. But it wasn't the silence that made my blood run cold. It was the man sitting in my chair, the leather recliner I'd given Mitchell for his 40th birthday. He appeared about my age, early 70s, with silver hair suggesting expensive barbers. On his wrist gleamed a Rolex. Most disturbing, he wore the navy cardigan with "World's Best Grandpa" embroidered on the pocket, the one Harper had given me last Christmas that had mysteriously disappeared. Harper burst through the crowd, her 19-year-old face flushed with panic. She grabbed my arm with both hands, pulling me toward the door. "Grandpa, you have to leave, now!" Her voice cracked with urgency, tears gathering. "Just go, please, trust me." Mitchell appeared, his face colored like overripe tomatoes. "Dad, I told you not to come. This is completely inappropriate." The stranger rose from my chair, walking over confidently. "Is this the neighbor you mentioned, Mitchell?" he asked pleasantly, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Gerald Thornton. Mitchell told me you live nearby." The words hit like physical blows. Mitchell's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, Mr. Thornton. Just a neighbor. He's leaving." Harper pressed something into my palm as she pushed me toward the door, a crumpled paper damp with sweat. "Check Dad's credit card bill you've been paying," she whispered urgently. "December 23rd. Look at that charge specifically." I sat in my car 10 minutes before I could drive, hands shaking too badly. The paper Harper had given me lay on the passenger seat. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. Her usually neat handwriting was barely legible. "Grandpa, check the credit card statements. $8,000 every month. 5 years. You paid for him to replace you. December 23rd. The Premium Family Experience website charge. We were told you agreed to it. That you wanted distance. I only learned the truth last week. Please forgive me." The November sky had turned the color of old pewter by the time I started my car. As I drove away from what had been my family's gathering place for 3 decades, one thought kept circling in my mind like a bird that couldn't find a place to land. For 5 years, I'd been paying Mitchell's credit card bills, $8,000 a month without question, because he said he was struggling, because family helps family. $480,000 total, I calculated, while someone else sat in my chair, wore my clothes, and called my grandchildren by the nicknames I'd given them. The road blurred in front of me, and I had to pull over twice on the way home, not from tears, but from the sheer disorientation of discovering that your life had been sold without your knowledge, and worse, that you'd been the one paying for it. The signs had been there for 6 months, maybe longer, but I'd wrapped them in excuses the way you'd wrap a broken gift to make it look whole. Looking back now from my kitchen table, surrounded by 5 years of credit card statements I'd pulled from my filing cabinet, I could see the pattern as clearly as tire tracks in fresh snow. Mitchell had started distancing me from family events, with the gentle persistence of someone turning down a radio so slowly, you don't notice the music fading until it's gone. Thanksgiving had been the first casualty, Mitchell claiming they were keeping it small because of Brenda's work stress. Christmas became a trip to Florida with just their immediate family. No room for grandparents. Easter passed without an invitation. And when I asked about Harper's high school graduation party, Mitchell said she wanted only friends her own age. The credit card bills told a different story than Mitchell had been feeding me. Here was the truth in black and white, line items reading like evidence in a trial I didn't know I was part of. December 23rd showed a charge for $15,000 to Premium Family Experience, LLC. The name meant nothing yet, but the amount made my coffee turn bitter. January had another payment, February another, regular as clockwork, always on the 23rd. But the restaurant bills from the exact dates of family gatherings I'd been excluded from made my stomach twist. Catering charges for parties I hadn't known existed. A photographer's fee was labeled Family Portrait Session last August. I remembered that August day particularly well. I'd called Mitchell to go fishing, something we'd done every summer since he was 7. He'd said he was swamped with work, couldn't possibly get away. I'd spent the day alone on the lake, thinking how success sometimes costs more than it pays. Now I pulled up Brenda's Facebook page, fingers trembling as I scrolled to August. There they were, the whole family in matching white shirts and khaki pants, posed on a beach at sunset. Mitchell, Brenda, their 3 children, and right in the center where I should have stood, Gerald Thornton, his arm around my youngest grandson. The photographs went back 2 years, each one a small betrayal preserved in digital amber. Thornton at Thanksgiving, carving turkey with the knife set I'd given Mitchell for his wedding. Thornton at Christmas, wearing a Santa hat, distributing presents. Thornton at Harper's graduation, standing where I should have stood, his hand on her shoulder in the proud grandfather pose I'd practiced that morning before Mitchell called saying they'd had to limit tickets. The comments under each photo made me close the laptop twice. "Your dad looks so distinguished," wrote someone. "What a beautiful family," added another. Mitchell had liked every comment. Desmond called my younger son, who'd become an engineer in Chicago, but still called every Sunday without fail. His voice sounded strained. "Warren, I heard what happened at the reunion. I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you months ago, but Mitchell said you knew about the arrangement, that you preferred it this way because of your health." I asked what arrangement, though Harper's note had already given me the broad strokes. After a long silence, Desmond told me about Premium Family Experience. The company provided what they called family choice enhancement services for people who could afford them. Lonely, wealthy individuals could essentially lease positions in real families, attending holidays and milestones as honorary members. Family bodies got monthly payments, clients got authentic experiences, everyone supposedly won. Thornton had been Mitchell's client for 2 years, paying $20,000 monthly for the grandfather package, including all major holidays, birthday celebrations, and up to 5 additional family events annually. The math made me sick. $20,000 a month, while I paid $8,000 for Mitchell's credit card bills, essentially funding both sides of my own replacement. Desmond's voice cracked, admitting everyone in the family had received payments to maintain the fiction, $5,000 each to pretend Thornton had always been there. I hung up on Desmond and immediately searched for Premium Family Experience online. Their website looked designed to sell luxury vacations, all soft focus photographs of happy multi-generational gatherings. The testimonials made me want to throw away my laptop. "I finally have the family I always dreamed of," wrote one client. But the available positions section truly turned my stomach. There was Mitchell's family, listed like Puck's property for rent. Loving middle-class family seeking grandfather figure. 3 grandchildren ages 5 to 19. Comfortable Westchester home setting. Traditional values with modern amenities. Previous grandfather recently distanced by choice. The position includes all major holidays and family milestones. Premium tier pricing reflects exceptional family quality and authentic emotional connections. Recently distanced by choice. Those 4 words echoed as I stood from the table and walked to the window, watching chickadees at the bird feeder I'd installed last spring. They had a better understanding of family than my own son. These little birds warning each other of dangers and sharing their findings. Harper called that evening from her car, voice thick with tears, parked outside a coffee shop so her father wouldn't hear. "Grandpa, I'm so sorry. I only found out last week when I overheard Dad on a business call discussing raising Thornton's rate because you'd been covering the base costs so well." She explained how Mitchell had told everyone I was becoming difficult in old age, that I'd requested distance but still wanted to support them financially. Mitchell had shown them texts I'd supposedly sent, saying I needed space. Of course, I'd never sent any such texts. Mitchell had simply created a fictional version of me to justify the real me's absence. The next morning, I drove to the bank for 5 years of statements showing all transfers to Mitchell. The teller, noticing my shaking hands, asked if everything was all right. I told her everything was fine, just financial planning. The total, when added up in the bank's consultation room, was $487,000. Nearly $500,000 I'd given my son, while living on Social Security and a small pension, eating store-brand cereal and keeping my thermostat at 62 degrees in winter to save money. I thought about confronting Mitchell immediately, but Harper had mentioned Thornton would be at their Thanksgiving dinner next week, that Mitchell had already taken payment for the whole holiday season. The way she said it suggested she hoped I'd do something. Sitting in that bank consultation room, surrounded by evidence of my son's breathtaking betrayal, I decided I would. Not just something, but something that would expose the whole rotten arrangement to everyone who'd participated in this fiction. That night, I sat at my computer and created my own listing on the Premium Family Experience website. It was surprisingly easy to set up a client profile, to describe what I was looking for in a family experience. I wrote that I was a 72-year-old man seeking to rent a son for the holidays, someone who would treat me with respect and genuine affection, someone who wouldn't take my money while selling my place at the table to the highest bidder. The irony wasn't lost on me as I typed, each word a small act of revenge against the son who'd turned our relationship into a commercial transaction. Within an hour, I had 3 responses from families offering their services, all of them promising authentic emotional connections and meaningful relationships. The prices ranged from $5,000 to $15,000 a month. The meeting with Gerald Thornton happened by accident 3 days after the reunion disaster. Though looking back, I wonder if anything in this carefully orchestrated deception could truly be called accidental. I was sitting in the coffee shop near Mitchell's office, the one where we used to meet for lunch back when he still acknowledged me as his father, when Thornton walked in wearing a cashmere coat that probably cost more than my car. He recognized me immediately, his face cycling through surprise, discomfort, and something that looked almost like pity. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the coffee shop like gunfighters in an old western, except instead of weapons, we were armed with the awkward knowledge of what we both represented in Mitchell's transactional world. Thornton approached my table with the confidence of someone who'd never been denied anything money could buy, pulling out the chair without asking. Up close, I could see the careful maintenance wealth afforded. Subtle work around his eyes, professionally whitened teeth, manicured hands that had never known manual labor. He ordered a $17 coffee with modifications taking longer to say than to drink. "Mitchell told me you were struggling with boundaries," he said, stirring his overpriced coffee. "That you'd requested distance from the family but couldn't quite let go." I let him sit in that uncertainty, studying this man who'd been wearing my cardigan, sitting in my chair, accepting my grandchildren's embraces. His hand trembled slightly, lifting the cup. Beneath all that expensive grooming, Gerald Thornton was uncomfortable. I showed him the bank statements. 5 years of $8,000 monthly transfers to Mitchell. $487,000 I've paid, while you were paying to replace me. His coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. Mitchell hadn't told him about the money I was sending. Thornton had thought he was filling a void left by a deadbeat grandfather, not displacing someone actively supporting the family. "He told me you abandoned them," Thornton said quietly. "Said you chose isolation over family, that the grandchildren barely remembered you." He scrolled through hundreds of photos with my family. Birthday parties, beach trips, school plays, all moments I'd missed while sitting alone, writing checks to support a life I wasn't allowed to participate in. He showed me my youngest grandson calling him Grandpa, running with arms outstretched. I had to look away. Thornton explained finding Mitchell's family on Premium Family Experience website, drawn to their listing promising authentic middle-class warmth and genuine family values. He'd lost his own family in divorce 20 years ago, his children poisoned against him by their mother, or so he claimed. When he discovered he could purchase a ready-made family, complete with grandchildren who'd call him Grandpa, he'd jumped at the chance. "The first payment was $20,000, he said, showing the transaction. Mitchell said it would help with college funds. $20,000 monthly for 2 years came to $480,000, almost exactly what I'd paid Mitchell. We'd both been funding this charade from different angles, 2 old men paying for grandfather privileges, except only one got to actually see them. Mitchell had provided Thornton with a detailed briefing about the family, including fabricated information about me. According to Mitchell's fiction, I was difficult, increasingly paranoid and aggressive, making gatherings uncomfortable for children. There were fake medical reports suggesting early dementia, forged emails where I supposedly expressed desire to be left alone, even staged video of someone vaguely resembling me shouting at Mitchell. "He gave me your history," Thornton continued, pulling out a folder. Inside were notes about my supposed favorite foods, hobbies, real stories from Mitchell's childhood with Thornton inserted where I belonged. There was a script for telling the story about teaching Mitchell to ride a bike, complete with crashing into Mrs. Patterson's rose bush, except in this version, Thornton had picked him up and dried his tears. The training sessions were elaborate. Thornton described weekly meetings where Mitchell coached him on family dynamics, teaching each grandchild's preferences, inside jokes, fears, and dreams. There were practice runs for holiday dinners, rehearsals for birthday toasts, role-playing exercises for difficult conversations. Mitchell had turned being grandfather into a performance, complete with stage directions. "There's a gala," Thornton said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Premium Family Experience hosts it every December. Mitchell will be there, actually receiving an award for being one of their most successful family providers." The idea of Mitchell being celebrated for selling his father's place was grotesque. "I'll be there as their client. You could come as my guest." Then Thornton added something that changed everything. "Mitchell isn't the only one involved. I've been getting invoices showing payments to others. Your brother Desmond, Mitchell's wife Brenda, even Harper eventually." He showed me documents. Monthly payments of $5,000 to Desmond, $3,000 to Brenda, $1,500 to Harper, starting 2 months ago. The betrayal spread like ink in water. My brother, who called every Sunday, had been taking money to maintain the lie. Brenda had been cashing checks while posting photos of Thornton as family patriarch. Even Harper, who'd warned me at the reunion, had eventually been bought. "We've both been used," Thornton said softly. "I thought I was buying something real. Connection, belonging, love. But it was all performance, wasn't it? Every hug, every 'I love you, Grandpa,' was just a transaction." We exchanged numbers before parting, an odd alliance forming. "The gala is December 15th, he said. "Black tie, $500 a ticket, but I can get you in as my +1. That evening, I called my lawyer, updating him on Thornton's revelations. "Warren, this goes beyond family betrayal. This is organized fraud, conspiracy, potentially elder abuse. But I didn't want legal destruction. I wanted them to understand what they'd done, to stand exposed before everyone who'd participated in this charade." The next morning, I called Premium Family Experience directly, upgrading to Platinum Tier for automatic gala invitation. The representative was delighted when I mentioned interest in featuring my story. "We love having clients share their experiences," she gushed. I also reached out to other listed families, presenting myself as a journalist. Their stories were variations on the same theme: lonely, wealthy individuals paying for belonging, families justifying arrangements as helping everyone, children confused about multiple grandparents coming and going based on payment schedules. One mother broke down crying, admitting she felt like she was prostituting her family but couldn't refuse the money. Research revealed at least 5 similar services in the tri-state area, all facilitating commodification of family relationships. Some specialized in specific demographics. Prices reached $50,000 monthly for exclusive family access. The industry had its own terminology. Real family members were legacy relations, and paid relationships were enhanced connections. By the end of the week, I had compiled a dossier that would have impressed any investigative journalist. Screenshots of Mitchell's family listing, payment records from both Thornton and myself, testimonials from other families involved in similar arrangements, and most damning of all, a recording of Mitchell himself that Harper had secretly made and sent to me. In it, he discussed his plans to expand the business, maybe even start his own company focused on what he called relationship arbitrage, essentially becoming a middleman between lonely, wealthy people and families willing to rent out their affection. His voice on the recording was animated, excited, completely devoid of any awareness that he was talking about selling human connection like it was real estate. The confrontation I'd been avoiding finally happened 2 weeks before the gala, in the most mundane of places, the grocery store parking lot where I'd taught Mitchell to drive 30 years ago. The asphalt was cracked in the same places, weeds pushing through like memories that refused to stay buried. I was loading bags into my trunk when his BMW pulled up behind me, blocking my car in with the kind of casual aggression that told me this wasn't accidental. The November wind carried the smell of rain and rotting leaves, mixing with the exhaust from his still-running engine. Mitchell stepped out wearing his work clothes, the expensive suit and tie that projected success to his real estate clients, the same image of prosperity he'd been maintaining with my money. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the pavement as he approached, each step measured and deliberate. His face was set in hard lines, jaw clenched tight, the expression he used to wear as a teenager when he'd been caught in a lie, but was determined to brazen it out anyway. Mitchell stood in the parking lot, hands in pockets, studying me like a problem to solve rather than his father. The November wind carried the smell of coming snow as he spoke in his corporate voice. "Dad, we need to talk about your recent activities. Thornton told me about your coffee shop meeting. You're interfering with a legitimate business arrangement." I continued loading groceries, moving deliberately slowly, letting him stand in his expensive suit while I handled store-brand cereal and discounted bread. Each item reminded me how I'd been living, scrimping to send him money while he sold my place in the family. $487,000, I said finally. That's what I've paid you over 5 years while you were collecting $20,000 monthly from Thornton to replace me. Mitchell's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he shifted into a negotiation stance, talking about financial pressures, raising 3 kids, Brenda's medical bills from surgery 2 years ago. Every excuse was delivered with practiced sincerity, but I saw the calculation behind his eyes. The truth about Brenda's surgery particularly stung because I'd sent an extra $20,000 for those bills from my retirement savings. While I was draining savings, Thornton had been paying them $20,000 monthly, meaning they'd profited from Brenda's illness while letting me believe they were struggling. I showed him the screenshot of his family's listing on Premium Family Experience website, watching his face pale as he read his own words describing me as having recently distanced by choice. He tried to grab my phone, but I stepped back, scrolling through payment records, emails, and training videos. For the first time, he looked genuinely shaken. "The gala is in 2 weeks, I said. "I'll be there. So will Thornton. So will the evidence." Mitchell cycled through threats, bribes, and emotional manipulation desperately. He offered to pay me back, though we both knew he couldn't afford $500,000. He threatened legal action without grounds. He even tried tears, talking about balancing everyone's needs. Harper arrived, immediately understanding the situation. She positioned herself between us with bravery that reminded me of her grandmother. "Dad, let Grandpa go," she said simply, and Mitchell stepped aside. That evening, Harper called to confess her participation. She'd held out for months, refusing Mitchell's money to keep quiet about Thornton. But when college tuition came due, and Mitchell threatened to cut education funding if she didn't comply, she'd cracked. The $1,500 monthly went directly to school. She'd been documenting everything, keeping records of payments and instructions, preparing for when truth would emerge. The next day, Brenda arrived looking sleepless, carrying a box of documents. She spread contracts across my kitchen table with shaking hands. Agreements between Mitchell and Premium Family Experience, between Mitchell and private clients, even incorporation documents for Family Solutions, LLC. She'd discovered Mitchell's operation recently while looking for tax returns. She'd known about Thornton, had taken $3,000 monthly to stay quiet, thinking it was one-time desperation. She hadn't known about other families Mitchell was consulting for, helping them monetize relationships, or his percentage from referring clients to Premium Family Experience. She definitely hadn't known he'd been taking my money throughout. The documents revealed Mitchell had contracts with 7 area families, taking cuts of their Premium Family Experience earnings for optimization consulting. He taught them creating appealing listings, training rental family members, managing emotional labor, and maintaining multiple family versions. One contract showed him taking 30% for teaching families to maximize authentic presentation while maintaining boundary management. His pitch deck for potential investors in Family Solutions, LLC talked about untapped market of emotional commerce and scalability of managed effective labor. He'd projected $5 million revenue in the first year, expanding to 50 families with 20% management fees. Graphs showed loneliness growth in America, wealth concentration among childless seniors, turning human isolation into business opportunity. The final slide showed a happy multi-generational gathering with the tagline, "Bringing families together profitably." Mitchell had been using the college fund I'd contributed to for years as leverage, moving money into accounts only he controlled, doling it out based on compliance. Every family member had something Mitchell held over them. For Desmond, a house loan. For Brenda, credit cards and car payments. For Harper, education. He'd created financial dependency, making resistance costly, turning family bonds into obligation chains. Mitchell hadn't just betrayed me, he'd corrupted the entire family structure, replacing love with transactions, trust with contracts, belonging with monthly payments. He'd taught his children relationships were commodities, affection could be bought, family was whoever could afford the privilege. Brenda agreed to help, providing passwords to email accounts, cloud storage access, even security recordings showing Mitchell coaching Thornton on acting like me. In one painful video, Mitchell demonstrated my laugh, my storytelling style, even my tongue clicking when thinking. Thornton practiced each mannerism while Mitchell critiqued performance. I spent hours organizing evidence, creating an undeniable presentation for the gala. I contacted an old friend in audio-visual services who agreed to help without questions. We prepared everything on multiple USB drives. 3 days before the gala, Thornton called with disturbing news. Mitchell was calling other premium family experience families, warning about a disgruntled former family member who might disrupt the event. He was painting me as senile, possibly dangerous, rallying families against the crazy old man who couldn't accept changed times. The character assassination showed Mitchell was scared. I contacted a journalist who'd written about the gig economy, sending an anonymous tip about premium family experience. I also invited several of Thornton's wealthy acquaintances as guests to see an innovative solution to modern family challenges. Each invitation was a potential witness. I wrote letters to each grandchild, explaining what happened, apologizing for my absence, and promising my love regardless of the gala's outcome. I didn't know if they'd read them or if Mitchell would intercept them, but I needed them knowing I hadn't abandoned them. I also drafted a letter from Mitchell, trying to understand how my son became someone who could sell his father's place, turn relationships into revenue. I wondered if I'd failed him, if my emphasis on hard work mutated into grotesque profit pursuit. But I held him accountable for choices made as a grown man. The night before the gala, I couldn't sleep, watching snow fall, thinking about winter's mist with grandchildren, unmade snowmen, and unshared hot chocolate. Tomorrow would either restore my place or destroy what remained. But doing nothing was no longer possible. Truth had to emerge, even ugly. I remembered Thornton in my chair, wearing my cardigan, holding my grandson, and knew I had to see this through. The morning of the gala arrived gray and cold, fitting weather for what was about to unfold. I put on my one good suit, the one I'd worn to my wife's funeral, and looked at myself in the mirror. I saw an old man who'd been erased from his own family, who'd paid for the privilege of being forgotten, who'd been replaced by someone with deeper pockets and fewer questions. But I also saw someone who still had a fight left, who wasn't going to fade quietly into the background of his own life. I picked up the USB drives with the evidence, put them in my pocket, and headed for the door. The gala was in 6 hours, and I had a family to reclaim, or at least a truth to tell. The days leading up to the gala became a chess match played through intermediaries and veiled threats. Mitchell had Harper call me. Her voice strained as she read from what was obviously a script he'd written. She talked about family harmony, about the importance of not making scenes, about how the children would be affected if I caused trouble at such a public event. I could hear Mitchell coaching her in the background, his voice a low murmur prompting her when she hesitated. The call ended with Harper whispering quickly before hanging up, "He's planning something, Grandpa. Be careful." Those 4 words told me more than the entire scripted conversation. Thornton and I met twice more before the gala, refining our plan like conspirators plotting a revolution. He'd managed to get the event program and discovered that Mitchell was not just attending, but was scheduled to speak about his family's success story with premium family experience. The thought of my son standing on stage, telling hundreds of people how profitable it had been to sell his father's place in the family, made my hands shake with rage. Thornton had also learned that several major investors in the family rental industry would be attending, people who could potentially fund Mitchell's expansion plans for Family Solutions, LLC. The journalist I'd contacted, a woman named Rebecca, who'd won awards for her investigative work, called to confirm she'd be attending. She'd done her own research after my tip and discovered what she called a shadow industry of family commodification that went far deeper than just premium family experience. There were companies specializing in every type of family relationship, from siblings to cousins to godparents, all of them turning human connection into monthly subscriptions. She was bringing a photographer and planned to write a series of articles about what she called the loneliness economy. I gave her just enough additional information to ensure she'd be watching when Mitchell took the stage. Brenda continued to feed me information from inside Mitchell's preparation for the gala. He'd rented a tuxedo that cost more than most people's monthly rent, bought new outfits for all 3 children, and even hired a professional photographer to document their family's triumph. He'd been practicing his speech for days, standing in front of the mirror, perfecting his delivery of lines like, "Authentic relationships transcend traditional boundaries," and "We've discovered that love multiplies when shared broadly." The corporate speech was nauseating, but what really turned my stomach was learning he'd prepared a special acknowledgement for Thornton, planning to call him up on stage as an example of successful family integration. 2 nights before the gala, something unexpected happened. My youngest grandson, 5-year-old Tommy, called me on Brenda's phone while she was in the shower. His little voice was confused as he asked, "Grandpa Warren? Mommy says you're sick, but you sound okay. Are you coming to see us soon?" The innocence in his voice broke something inside me. This child barely remembered me, had been told I was sick or dangerous or distant, had been taught to call another man grandpa while I sent checks to support his life. I told him I loved him and would see him very soon, and he said he loved me too before Brenda discovered him and quickly ended the call. That brief conversation with Tommy changed something fundamental in my approach to the gala. This wasn't just about exposing Mitchell's deception or reclaiming my place in the family. It was about those children, my grandchildren, who were growing up in a world where family relationships were treated as commodities, where love was something that could be rented by the month. They needed to know that real family bonds couldn't be bought or sold, that some things in life existed outside the marketplace of human connection. The truth needed to come out not just for my vindication, but for their understanding of what family really meant. I spent the day before the gala making final preparations with an obsessive attention to detail. The USB drives were loaded with everything: the payment records, the contracts, the website listings, the training videos, Harper's recordings of Mitchell, even the security footage Brenda had provided of Mitchell coaching Thornton. I had my friend from the audio-visual company confirm he'd be working the event and could override the presentation system if needed. I also arranged for backup plans, emailing copies of key documents to myself and to the journalist, creating a paper trail that couldn't be destroyed if Mitchell somehow managed to stop my electronic presentation. The morning of the gala, I woke at 4:30, unable to sleep any longer. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, looking through the old photo albums one more time. There was a picture from Mitchell's college graduation. His arm around me, both of us smiling with genuine pride and love. That was before success became his religion, before money became the only language he understood. I wondered if that young man still existed somewhere inside the corporate shark who'd monetized his own father. The thought that I might be about to destroy not just Mitchell's business, but possibly Mitchell himself weighed on me, but not enough to stop me. Harper called around noon, her voice barely above a whisper. She was at the hotel where the gala would be held, helping with setup as part of the family's preparation. "Grandpa, Dad's got security watching for you. He told them you're a confused old man who might try to disrupt the event. They have your picture." She gave me the security company's name and described their positions, information that proved invaluable. She also warned me that Mitchell had prepared a counter-narrative in case I managed to speak, ready to paint me as a bitter old man, angry about being replaced after years of voluntary absence. Thornton picked me up at 5, driving his Mercedes in silence for most of the journey. As we got closer to the hotel, he finally spoke about his own feelings regarding the evening ahead. He'd genuinely developed affection for my grandchildren, he said, even knowing the relationships were transactional. The thought of losing them hurt, but the thought of continuing to participate in Mitchell's deception hurt more. He'd decided to publicly renounce his grandfather position and expose the entire arrangement, regardless of the personal cost. His courage, coming from someone who'd been complicit in the scheme, gave me strength for what was ahead. The hotel was a monument to excess, all marble and crystal and gold fixtures that screamed wealth rather than whispered it. The valet who took Thornton's keys barely looked at us. Just another pair of old men at another expensive event. But walking through those doors felt like crossing into enemy territory, entering a world where human relationships were openly traded like stocks and bonds. The lobby was full of people in formal wear, families and their clients, mingling with the artificial ease of practiced performance. I recognized some faces from the Premium Family Experience website, real families who'd turned themselves into products. Registration was the first hurdle. The woman at the desk looked at Thornton's +1 designation, then at me, then at her tablet, with increasing confusion. She excused herself and returned with a manager who studied me with the kind of scrutiny that suggested Mitchell's warning had been received. But Thornton handled it smoothly, his wealth and confidence overwhelming their suspicions. "This is my dear friend Warren," he said with perfect calm. "We're both very interested in innovative family solutions." The words were true, even if the meaning they heard wasn't the one we intended. The ballroom was set up like a wedding reception, round tables with white tablecloths and centerpieces of fake flowers that seemed symbolically appropriate for an event celebrating artificial families. A stage at the front held a podium and large screens for presentations. I noted the audio-visual booth in the back corner where my friend would be working, caught his eye, and received a subtle nod of acknowledgement. The pieces were in place. Now I just had to wait for the right moment to deploy them. Mitchell arrived with his family 45 minutes before the program was scheduled to begin, making an entrance that was clearly choreographed for maximum impact. Brenda wore a dress that probably cost more than I spent on food in 6 months. The children were dressed like tiny adults, and Mitchell himself looked like he'd stepped out of a wealth management advertisement. They moved through the room like royalty, Mitchell shaking hands and making connections, completely in his element. When he saw me, his face went through several rapid transformations before settling on cold fury, masked by a professional smile. He excused himself from his conversation and walked over, Thornton and I standing our ground as he approached. "Dad," he said loud enough for others to hear. "How wonderful that Mr. Thornton brought you. I hope you're feeling well enough to enjoy the evening." The emphasis on "well enough" was clear, planting seeds of doubt about my mental state. Then, leaning closer so only we could hear, he added, "Security knows about you. One disturbance, and you're out. Don't embarrass yourself." The threat was delivered with a smile that never reached his eyes, the kind of smile he probably used when foreclosing on someone's home. Harper appeared at my elbow as Mitchell walked away, slipping something into my pocket. It was a program with handwritten notes in the margins, details about the speaking order, and technical cues that would prove invaluable. She hugged me quickly, whispering, "Good luck," before returning to her family's table. Brenda caught my eye from across the room and gave the slightest nod, confirming she was ready to play her part. Even Desmond, who'd arrived late looking uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo, managed to acknowledge me with a guilty wave. The program began with the CEO of Premium Family Experience, a woman named Victoria Sterling, who spoke about family innovation with the passion of someone who'd never experienced actual family dysfunction. She presented statistics about loneliness, about the atomization of modern society, about the solution their company provided. The audience applauded warmly, these families who'd sold pieces of themselves and the clients who'd bought them, all celebrating the commodification of human connection as if it were a humanitarian achievement. Several families were called up to share testimonials, each one more disturbing than the last. A family from New Jersey talked about how their grandfather client had become even better than the real thing. A widow from Connecticut tearfully described finding the son she never had through the service. Each story was crafted to tug heartstrings while ignoring the fundamental perversion of turning relationships into rentals. The audience ate it up, many wiping away tears at these beautiful stories of purchased belongings. Then came Mitchell's moment. Victoria Sterling introduced him as one of their premier family providers and a pioneer in relationship innovation. The applause was thunderous as he took the stage, his family standing to support him, Thornton notably remaining seated beside me. Mitchell began his speech with practiced emotion, talking about the death of his mother, my wife, and how it had made him realize that family was about choice rather than blood. The revision of history was breathtaking, turning our genuine loss into a marketing opportunity. He continued with the story of meeting Thornton, describing it as fate bringing together two souls who needed each other. He talked about the joy of seeing Thornton with the children, the value of chosen family, the beauty of relationships that transcended traditional boundaries. Every word was perfectly crafted to obscure the financial transaction at the heart of it all. He never mentioned the 20,000 monthly payments, the training sessions, the script he'd written for Thornton to follow. He certainly never mentioned the father he'd erased to make room for his paying customer. The moment he called Thornton to join him on stage was when everything began to unravel. Thornton stood slowly, and I could see Mitchell's confidence falter slightly when he realized I was standing too. We walked to the stage together, two old men who'd been on opposite sides of the same con. Mitchell's face went pale, but he tried to maintain control, saying into the microphone, "And here's Mr. Thornton now with a friend." The uncertainty in his voice was the first crack in his polished presentation. Thornton took the microphone before Mitchell could stop him. "Thank you, Mitchell. I'd like to introduce everyone to Warren Henderson, Mitchell's biological father, the man whose place I've been renting for 2 years." The ballroom went silent, except for the sound of someone dropping a glass. Mitchell reached for the microphone, but Thornton stepped back, continuing, "I've paid $20,000 a month to be these children's grandfather, while their real grandfather, Warren here, was paying Mitchell's bills and being told he wasn't welcome at family gatherings." The screens behind us suddenly came alive with my presentation, my friend in the audio-visual booth having received his cue. The first slide showed Mitchell's family listing on Premium Family Experience, describing me as recently distanced by choice. The next showed the payment records, $20,000 a month from Thornton, $8,000 a month from me. Then came the contracts, the training videos, the security footage of Mitchell teaching Thornton how to imitate me. The audience watched in stunned silence as 2 years of deception unfolded in devastating detail. Mitchell tried to grab the microphone back, but I stepped forward and took it instead. My voice was steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "My name is Warren Henderson. For 5 years I've paid my son $487,000, while being told I wasn't welcome in my family's life. During that same time, he collected $480,000 from Mr. Thornton to play the role of grandfather to my grandchildren. That's nearly $1 million earned from selling something that should never be for sale, a father's place in his family. The presentation continued behind us, showing Mitchell's business plans for family. Solutions LLC, his contracts with other families, his vision for turning human relationships into a multi-million-dollar industry. Rebecca was in the front row, her photographer capturing every moment, while the other families involved in premium family experience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some began to quietly leave, recognizing that their own arrangements were about to come under scrutiny. Brenda stood up at our table, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "I'm Mitchell's wife, and I'm filing for divorce. I won't raise my children in a world where family love is for sale." Harper stood next, then Desmond, both of them walking to join Thornton and me on stage. The symbolic abandonment of Mitchell, standing alone at the podium while his family chose truth over profit, was more powerful than any words could have been. Mitchell made one last, desperate attempt to salvage the situation, taking the microphone and trying to spin the narrative. He talked about helping lonely seniors, about creating new forms of family, about the money going to his children's education. But his voice cracked when Tommy, my youngest grandson, called out from the audience, "Grandpa Warren, is that you?" The innocent voice of a child, recognizing his real grandfather, cut through all the corporate speak and justification. I walked off the stage and went to him, picking him up for the first time in 2 years, feeling his small arms wrap around my neck. The ballroom erupted into chaos after Tommy's recognition of me. But it was a controlled chaos, the kind where everyone pretends to be calm while their world reshapes itself. Mitchell stood alone on the stage, the microphone hanging uselessly in his hand as families began gathering their things, clients demanding explanations, and premium family experience executives huddling in panicked consultation. Victoria Sterling tried to restore order, her professional composure cracking as she watched her company's reputation crumble in real time. The photographer Rebecca moved through the crowd like a ghost, capturing every moment of institutional collapse, every face that showed the dawning realization of what they'd all been participating in. Tommy wouldn't let go of me, his 5-year-old arms locked around my neck with surprising strength. He kept touching my face as if to make sure I was real, asking questions that broke my heart with their innocence. Why had I been gone so long? Was I really sick, like Daddy said? Could I come to his birthday party next month? His older siblings, 13-year-old Michael and 10-year-old Sarah, approached cautiously, their faces showing the confusion of children who'd been told conflicting stories about someone they barely remembered. Sarah looked at her mother, then at Mitchell, then back at me, trying to piece together which version of reality was true. Brenda took charge of the children with a quiet efficiency that suggested she'd been preparing for this moment. She gathered them close, speaking in low, reassuring tones while keeping them away from Mitchell, who was now surrounded by angry premium family experience clients demanding refunds. One elderly woman was crying, saying she'd thought she'd found a real family, that she'd changed her will to include Mitchell's children. Another client, a wealthy businessman who'd been renting a son from another family, was on his phone with his lawyer, using words like fraud and misrepresentation loud enough for everyone to hear. The presentation continued playing on the screens behind the chaos, a relentless display of evidence that Mitchell couldn't stop or deny. There were emails where he discussed maximizing revenue per family unit, spreadsheets showing profit margins on different relationship packages, even a recorded phone call where he laughed about how easy it was to manipulate lonely old money. Each new revelation sent another wave of shock through the audience, families realizing they weren't pioneers in some new form of connection, but participants in an elaborate emotional pyramid scheme. Harper stood beside me, tears streaming down her face as she watched her father's public destruction. She'd helped make this happen, but seeing it unfold was different from planning it. She kept apologizing, not just to me, but to her younger siblings, to her mother, even to Thornton, who stood quietly observing the aftermath of his complicity. Her guilt was palpable, the weight of having taken money to maintain a lie that had hurt everyone involved. I put my free arm around her, Tommy still clinging to my other side, and told her that courage sometimes comes late, but it still counts when it arrives. Desmond had moved to the audio-visual booth, ensuring the presentation would complete its full cycle. He'd added his own evidence at the last minute, screenshots of Mitchell pressuring him to recruit other families into the scheme, offering him a percentage of any new inventory he could bring to premium family experience. The term inventory for human families was so grotesque that several people audibly gasped when it appeared on screen. Desmond's participation in exposing his brother was clearly painful for him, but he'd chosen truth over blood, a reversal of the choice he'd made when he'd taken money to keep quiet. Security guards had appeared, but seemed unsure what to do. Their job was to maintain order at corporate events, not navigate the collapse of an entire industry's facade. They stood at the edges of the room like confused sentinels, watching as families confronted each other, as clients demanded answers, as the entire construct of purchased relationships fell apart. One guard approached Mitchell, possibly to escort him out, but Mitchell waved him away with a fury that suggested he hadn't yet accepted his defeat. Rebecca had commandeered a corner of the ballroom, interviewing families and clients while the chaos provided cover for honest conversation. People who'd been maintaining facades for months or years suddenly felt free to speak the truth. One mother admitted she'd felt like she was prostituting her children's affection. A client confessed he'd known the relationships were fake, but had preferred pleasant lies to honest loneliness. Each interview was another nail in the coffin of premium family experience and Mitchell's dreams of expanding the industry. The executives of Premium Family Experience attempted damage control, with Victoria Sterling taking the stage to announce that the evening's program would be suspended pending a review of their policies. Her corporate speech was almost comical in the context of what had been revealed. She talked about ensuring authentic experiences and maintaining relationship integrity, while behind her, the screens showed contracts that literally priced out hugs, birthday wishes, and holiday dinners. The disconnect between her words and the evidence was so stark that someone actually laughed, a bitter sound that spread through the crowd. Mitchell finally left the stage, but not in defeat. Instead, he walked toward me with the determined stride of someone who still thought he could salvage something from the wreckage. His face had moved past pale to a kind of gray that made him look older than his years. When he reached us, he looked at his children, at his wife, at me, and for a moment, I saw something crack in his facade. But instead of apologizing or showing remorse, he doubled down on his justification. He said everything he'd done had been for the family, that I would have wanted him to be successful, that traditional family structures were outdated anyway. Tommy interrupted his father's speech with a question that silenced everyone within earshot. "Daddy, why did you say Grandpa Warren was gone?" "He's right here." The innocent confusion in his voice was more damaging than any accusation could have been. Mitchell tried to answer, starting several different explanations, but each one died on his lips as he realized there was no way to explain to a 5-year-old why he'd sold his grandfather's place in the family. The silence stretched until Tommy turned to me and said, "You're not leaving again, right, Grandpa?" I promised him I wasn't going anywhere, a promise I intended to keep regardless of what Mitchell wanted. Sarah, my 10-year-old granddaughter, had been quiet through most of the chaos, but now she spoke up with the clarity that children sometimes possess. She asked Mitchell directly if he'd been paid to keep me away, if Thornton had been paying to be their grandfather. When Mitchell couldn't answer, she turned to Thornton and asked if he'd known I existed. Thornton's honest yes, his admission that he'd known he was replacing someone, brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. She looked at all the adults who'd participated in this deception and asked, "Did anyone think about how we felt?" The question hung in the air, unanswered because the truth was too shameful to speak. No one had thought about the children beyond their value as props in the family rental package. They'd been accessories to the transaction, their affection commodified along with everything else. Michael, the oldest, had his phone out and was reading the Premium Family Experience website, his face growing darker with each word. When he looked up at Mitchell, the betrayal in his eyes was complete. "You advertised us? Like we were for sale?" The disgust in his teenage voice carried across the room. Other families were having similar reckonings throughout the ballroom. Children discovering their relationships had been monetized. Elderly clients realizing they'd been prey rather than participants. Families confronting the fact that they'd sold something that shouldn't have had a price tag. The collective shame was palpable, a weight that seemed to press down on everyone present. Some families left quietly, unable to face what they'd done. Others stayed, perhaps hoping that witnessing the full collapse would somehow serve as penance. Thornton approached Mitchell with something resembling pity in his expression. He pulled out his phone and showed Mitchell something that made him stagger backward. It was a lawsuit, filed that afternoon, seeking damages for fraud, emotional distress, and misrepresentation. Thornton had hired a team of lawyers who'd been working all day to prepare the filing. But more than that, he'd been in contact with other clients, organizing a class action against Premium Family Experience and the families who'd participated. Mitchell's dream of $1 million business had become a nightmare of legal liability. The security footage of Mitchell training Thornton played on the screens, showing him demonstrating my mannerisms, my laugh, my way of telling stories. Watching Mitchell perform an exaggerated version of me was surreal and painful. He'd studied me like an actor preparing for a role, then taught another man to replicate what he'd learned. The audience watched in horrified fascination as Mitchell coached Thornton through grandfather scenarios, including how to respond when the children asked about me. "Tell them he's not feeling well," Mitchell instructed on the video. "Keep it vague, but concerning enough that they won't push for details." Brenda had been gathering documents from other families, building her own case for the divorce proceedings. Several wives approached her, sharing their own stories of discovering their husbands had been selling family positions without their knowledge. One woman from Connecticut revealed her husband had been running 3 different grandmother rentals simultaneously, scheduling them like shift workers to maximize revenue. The systematic nature of the deception was staggering. An entire underground economy built on the commodification of love. As the presentation neared its end, the final slides showed something I hadn't prepared, but Harper had added. It was a collection of real family photos from before the scheme began, images of genuine moments, rather than staged performances. There was Mitchell as a child on my shoulders, Brenda and Mitchell's wedding, where I'd walked her down the aisle after her father passed, the grandchildren as babies in my arms. The contrast between these authentic moments and the purchased relationships being sold was devastating. Several people in the audience were crying, perhaps recognizing what they'd lost in the pursuit of profit. Mitchell made one final attempt to speak, grabbing a microphone from the audio-visual booth. His voice was raw as he tried to reframe the narrative one last time. He talked about innovation, about meeting market needs, about the future of human connection in an atomized society. But his corporate speak sounded hollow in a room full of people who'd just witnessed the human cost of his innovation. When he mentioned that he'd been providing a service, someone shouted from the audience, "You sold your father!" The accusation echoed in the ballroom, and Mitchell finally stopped talking. The children had gravitated toward me throughout the evening, even Michael, who'd been trying to maintain teenage coolness. They stood close, as if proximity could make up for 2 years of absence. Tommy hadn't let go of my hand since I'd picked him up, and Sarah kept looking at me like she was trying to memorize my face. Michael asked quietly if I'd really been paying their father the whole time, if I'd really wanted to see them. When I confirmed both, he shook his head and muttered something about never trusting anyone again. The cynicism in his voice at 13 was heartbreaking, a casualty of his father's scheme. Victoria Sterling tried one more time to salvage something from the evening, announcing that Premium Family Experience would be conducting a full review of their practices and implementing new ethical guidelines. But Rebecca stood up and informed the room that her investigation had revealed Premium Family Experience was partially owned by a hedge fund that specialized in alternative asset classes, essentially treating human relationships as investment vehicles. The revelation that Wall Street was behind the family rental industry sent another shock through the crowd. This wasn't just about lonely people and struggling families. It was about profit margins and quarterly returns. The ballroom began to empty as families fled the scene of their collective shame. Some left in tears, others in anger, many in silence. The Premium Family Experience banner that had welcomed everyone now seemed like a mockery. Its slogan, "Bringing Families Together," a cruel joke in the aftermath of so many relationships destroyed. Hotel staff stood awkwardly at the edges, unsure whether to begin cleaning up or wait for the last of the drama to unfold. The abandoned centerpieces of fake flowers seemed prophetic, artificial beauty that looked real from a distance, but revealed its falseness up close. Mitchell's business partners, the other families he'd been consulting for, confronted him near the exit. They'd all received cease and desist letters from attorneys, their own family rental operations under threat of legal action. One man accused Mitchell of destroying an entire industry with his greed, of pushing too far, and bringing scrutiny to what had been a quiet arrangement. Mitchell tried to defend himself, but his words were drowned out by the accusations. His dream of being a pioneer in relationship arbitrage had become a nightmare of lawsuits and public humiliation. As we prepared to leave, Tommy asked if he could come home with me. The question tore at everyone present, this child choosing the grandfather he barely knew over the father who'd sold him. Brenda gently explained that he needed to go home with her tonight, but promised he could visit me tomorrow. Mitchell watched this exchange from across the room, isolated and alone, seeing his family make plans that didn't include him. The man who'd tried to monetize relationships had discovered that real connections couldn't be bought back once they were sold. Harper hugged me tightly before leaving with her mother and siblings. She whispered that she was sorry for everything, for taking the money, for not speaking up sooner, for letting it go on so long. I told her that family meant forgiving each other, that real relationships could survive mistakes that transactional ones couldn't. She nodded through her tears and promised to call me tomorrow. As she walked away with her family, Mitchell tried to join them, but Brenda's look stopped him cold. He would be leaving alone tonight. A fitting end for someone who'd chosen money over family. The last image on the presentation screens was one Harper had found in my house during a secret visit last week. It was a photo of Mitchell and me fishing when he was 7, both of us laughing at something lost to time. Underneath, Harper had added text that read, "Some things are priceless. Family is one of them." Mitchell stood staring at that image long after everyone else had left, perhaps finally understanding what he'd sold for $20,000 a month. I wanted to feel satisfaction at his destruction, but all I felt was sadness for the son I'd lost long before he'd sold my place in the family. Thornton offered to drive me home, and we left together, two old men who'd been on opposite sides of a transaction that should never have existed. As we walked through the hotel lobby, we passed other families from the gala, some still arguing, others walking in stunned silence. The doorman, who'd seen us all arrive in our finery, now watched us leave in various states of emotional undress. The evening that was supposed to celebrate innovative family solutions had instead exposed the moral bankruptcy at the heart of turning relationships into rentals. 6 months later, I sat in my backyard watching Tommy and Sarah plant tomatoes in the garden we'd started together. Their small hands worked the soil with careful concentration, learning something that couldn't be bought or sold, only nurtured. Michael sat on the porch steps, supposedly too cool for gardening, but unable to resist offering advice about proper spacing between plants. These weekend visits had become our new routine, rebuilt slowly from the wreckage of Mitchell's schemes. Mitchell's empire had collapsed completely within weeks of the gala. Premium Family Experience filed for bankruptcy after the class action lawsuit gained 300 plaintiffs. He'd lost his real estate license when the scandal broke, the state board deciding someone who would sell his own father couldn't be trusted with other people's homes. The man who'd dreamed of a $5 million business now worked at a car rental agency, processing returns. Brenda had gotten the house in the divorce, along with full custody. She'd returned every penny of the money she'd taken to keep quiet, using it to start a college fund Mitchell couldn't touch. The divorce had been brutal, but quick, the judge showing little sympathy for a man who'd monetized his children's grandfather. Brenda started therapy for the whole family, helping the children understand what had happened. The therapist said it would take years for them to fully process how their relationships had been commodified. Thornton and I had developed an unexpected friendship from our shared experience. He came by monthly for coffee, and we'd sit on my porch talking about everything except the 2 years he'd rented my life. He'd donated his lawsuit settlement to a charity connecting lonely seniors with volunteer families, real relationships without price tags. Sometimes I caught him looking at photos from his time as the children's grandfather, the sadness in his eyes reminding me he'd been a victim too. Harper had taken a gap year from college to figure out who she was outside her father's schemes. She lived with Brenda now, helping with her younger siblings and working at a local bookstore. She visited me every Tuesday for dinner, while she told me about her plans to study social work. She wanted to help families, she said, real families with real problems, not manufactured ones with profit margins. The guilt she carried was still visible in quiet moments, but she was learning to forgive herself. Rebecca's article series had won a Pulitzer, exposing not just premium family experience, but an entire shadow industry of relationship commodification. She'd found companies selling every type of human connection, from best friends to godparents, all turning loneliness into profit. The series sparked national conversation about commercializing intimacy, about what happened when capitalism invaded spaces meant to exist outside the market. Mitchell became the poster child for this moral failure. The children never talked about Thornton anymore, though they'd seen him once at a grocery store. Tommy had waved, Sarah had looked away, and Michael had stood protectively between them and the man who'd been their grandfather for 2 years. The confusion in that moment led to difficult conversations about why adults sometimes did wrong things that seemed right to them. The children were learning too young that love could be performed, that affection could be scripted, that even family could be fake. My bank account had recovered somewhat after I stopped sending Mitchell money. I'd never get back the $487,000, but I didn't need it. What I needed was Saturday mornings with Tommy reading stories, Sunday dinners with Sarah helping me cook, late-night talks with Michael about growing up. These moments were worth more than any amount, which was exactly what Mitchell had missed. The last time I saw Mitchell was at a gas station 3 weeks ago. He was pumping gas into an old car, far from the BMW he'd driven before. We stood there, father and son, separated by 20 feet and $1 million of betrayal. Finally, he just nodded and drove away. I didn't hate him anymore. I pitied him, this man who'd gained a fortune and lost a family, who'd learned the price of everything but the value of nothing. Mitchell had tried to sell something that multiplied when given away freely. Love, attention, affection weren't finite resources that decreased with use. The more I gave to my grandchildren, the more I had to give. He'd tried to apply market logic to something existing outside the market, and in doing so, had lost both money and family. He'd learned too late that some things really were priceless, not because they were expensive, but because they couldn't be priced at all. What would you do if you discovered your family had put a price tag on your place at the table? Could you find your way back to each other after learning that love had been for sale? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And remember, the most valuable things in life aren't things at all.